I've always been drawn to the ocean. There's just something about the way it moves, the way it sounds. My friends would often tease me, calling me a sea witch because of my fascination. Little did I know, my affinity for the ocean would lead me to the most terrifying experience of my life. I'm Alex Chen, a 32-year-old marine archaeologist. My team and I specialize in underwater recovery operations. We've worked on everything from sunken ships to submerged historical sites. So, when we received a call from the wealthy owner of the cliffside villa perched on the edge of the Pacific, we knew it was an opportunity we couldn't miss. The villa had collapsed into the ocean due to a landslide triggered by the heavy rainfall that had plagued the coast for weeks. The owner, Mr. Edward Blackstone, was more concerned about recovering his late father's priceless collection, which included rare artifacts and family heirlooms, than the loss of the property itself. He hired us to dive down, assess the situation, and retrieve as much as we could. Our team consisted of myself, my partner and friend Rachel Lee, an expert in underwater salvage, and two new recruits, Mike and Emma, both skilled divers. We arrived at the site on a crisp sunny morning, the contrast between the beautiful day and our mission not lost on any of us. The descent into the ocean was routine, the water temperature a bit colder than expected but manageable with our gear. As we approached the bottom, a vast, murky cloud came into view. We exchanged cautious glances. Landslides often stir up the seabed, reducing visibility. However, as we swam closer, the cloud parted, revealing the villa. Intact, lit. It was as if the house had simply been picked up and placed gently at the bottom of the sea. Soft, golden light spilled out of the windows, illuminating the debris-free area around it. We floated there, stunned, our comms devices silent except for the sound of heavy breathing. Rachel broke the silence, her voice barely above a whisper. "This is impossible. There should be damage, debris everywhere." Her trail off hung in the water like the question itself. We cautiously entered the villa, finding ourselves in a lavish living room. Everything was in place, from the vases on the shelves to the family photos on the walls. It was as if the occupants had just stepped out for a walk. But for the eerie lighting, which none of our scans could source, and the absolute silence, you'd never guess this house was underwater. Mike, ever the jokester, tried to lighten the mood. Guess the previous owners were really into that whole under-the-sea vibe. The attempt at humor fell flat, the tension palpable. While searching the bedrooms, Emma found a diary belonging to a girl named Sophia. As she flipped through the pages, her expression changed from curiosity to horror. "Guys, you need to see this," she called out, her voice trembling. The entries were recent. The last one dated the day before the landslide. Sophia wrote about living in the villa with her family, but there were mentions of strange noises, movements in the night, and an overwhelming feeling of being watched. The final entry read, "I've seen it. Outside my window. In the water. It's been waiting. I know it's coming for us. Father says I'm paranoid, but I know what I've seen. The lights in the house have been acting strange too. Sometimes they flicker, other times they're too bright. I'm scared. Oh God, I'm so scared." We realized then that we weren't just recovering belongings, we were uncovering a mystery. The question on everyone's mind, though unspoken, was clear. Could Sophia and her family still be alive in here somehow? As night began to fall on the surface, we decided to set up a temporary base inside the villa to continue our search in the morning. The decision would prove to be our downfall. Sleep was elusive, the silence of the villa oppressive. I was awoken by Rachel's scream. Mike was gone. His diving gear lay by the window, the glass shattered. Outside, the darkness of the ocean seemed to press in, the golden light of the villa, now sinister. We frantically searched the villa, calling out for Mike. It was then we heard the noises Sophia had written about. Footsteps, whispers, the creaking of wooden floorboards under unseen feet. Panic set in. We were not alone in the villa. In the chaos, Emma disappeared. We found ourselves back at the entrance, desperate to escape, but the door wouldn't budge. We were trapped. It was then I saw it. Through the window. A figure. Not Mike, not Emma. Something else. Watching us. The realization hit me like a tidal wave. The villa wasn't just a house, it was a trap. And we had stumbled right into it. In a desperate bid to survive. We smashed through a window, the pressure almost crushing us. The ascent was a blur, our bodies screaming in protest. We broke the surface, gasping for air. But our relief was short-lived. As we looked back, the villa once again was shrouded in the murky cloud, the golden light extinguished. But on the surface, floating among the debris, was Sophia's diary, the last page torn out, with a message scrawled in red. "They're waiting for you, in the dark, where the lights can't reach." I'm writing this from a hospital bed, my body recovering from the ordeal. Rachel is the only other survivor. Mike and Emma were never found. The authorities are still searching for the villa, but I know it's gone, hidden once more beneath the waves, waiting. I've always been drawn to the ocean. Now I'm terrified of it. The sound of the waves outside my window is no longer soothing. It's a reminder. They're down there, waiting. And I know, someday, they'll come for us. I'm writing this by the light of a dingy motel room lamp, my mind still reeling from the events of the past 24 hours. I'm not even sure why I'm putting this down on paper. Maybe it's just to convince myself it wasn't all some wild, fevered dream. But it happened. I know it did. I was there, driving on that godforsaken highway, enveloped in a fog so thick it felt like a living entity. I'd been driving for what felt like an eternity, the GPS insisting I was making good time despite the crawling pace. The fog rolled in without warning, reducing visibility to near zero. I remembered thinking, this is it. This is how people die on highways. But I pressed on, headlights illuminating nothing but a wall of gray. That's when I saw it. Or rather, them. The brake lights of multiple cars ahead, all slammed on in unison. My heart sank as I hit my brakes, managing to stop just inches from the car in front. The next few minutes are a blur. I remember getting out, calling for help, and seeing that every car around me was empty. No sign of struggle, no blood, just nothing. It was as if the drivers had vanished into the fog. I was alone, or so I thought. The police arrived, and with them a sense of relief. But as they began to investigate, it became clear that I wasn't the only one bewildered by the scene. They found dashcam footage from one of the cars, and what it showed has been etched into my memory forever. I wasn't supposed to see it, but one of the younger officers, perhaps seeking to unnerve me further or simply out of a morbid curiosity, described it in vivid detail. The footage showed the car driving, the fog suddenly parting to reveal figures. Not people, figures. Impossibly tall, with limbs that seemed to twist in ways that defied human anatomy. They stepped out of the fog, moved towards the car, and then nothing. The car's occupants were gone, and the figures vanished back into the gray. Days passed, or at least I think they did. Time loses meaning in a situation like this. The police were stumped, and I found myself at the center of a media storm. The sole survivor of the Foggy Highway mass vanishing, the headlines screamed. I was interviewed, analyzed, and questioned until I thought I'd lose my mind. But I knew what I saw, or rather, what I didn't see. And then there were the dreams. Oh, the dreams, full of fog and figures, always just out of reach. I began to question my own sanity. It came from an unlikely source, a Quora thread I stumbled upon while researching superfog in a desperate bid to understand what had happened. A user, under the pseudonym Jennifer Anderson, shared a story about a similar incident decades ago. The key difference? A survivor who had managed to take a Polaroid of one of the figures. The description of the photo matched what I had seen in the dashcam footage. I tracked down Jennifer, and what she told me changed everything. These events, she explained, were not isolated. There were others, all connected by one thing: the fog. And the figures? They were not of this world, or at least, not in the way we understand it. Jennifer took me to meet Robert, a man who claimed to have experienced a similar event as a child. His story was chilling, full of references to Song Night, and a car ride that ended in terror. But it was his final words that sent a chill down my spine. It might even be kind of fun before it gets bad. Fun? Was he insane? But then I remembered the dreams, the feeling of being on the cusp of something, just before waking up in a cold sweat. It was anticipation, mixed with terror. I realized then that I wasn't a survivor. I was a participant. The fog, the figures, they were just the beginning. I had to get out, to warn others. But as I packed my bags, ready to flee, I heard it. A faint humming, like the start of a song. It was Wednesday night. I'm not sure how much longer I can keep running. The fog is closing in, and I can hear the song, louder now. I've seen them, the figures, out of the corner of my eye. They're waiting. If you're reading this, beware of the fog. Don't stop. Don't look back. And for God's sake, don't listen to the song. My phone rang, shrill in the dead of night, like a scream in an empty alley. I groggily reached for it, my mind still half submerged in the dream I was having about... Well, it doesn't matter now. The voice on the other end was familiar, yet laced with an urgency I'd never heard before. "Mike, it's Tom from Underground Operations. We need you at the Elm Street commuter tunnel. Now." Before I could ask why, the line went dead. I lay there for a moment, the darkness feeling heavier, as if the shadows themselves were listening. Then, with a sigh that seemed to deflate my very soul, I got up. The tunnel's entrance was a hive of activity. Police lights cast an otherworldly glow, and the air was thick with the smell of dust, sweat, and something else, something acrid. I spotted Tom, his face drawn, and made my way over. "Mike, thank God. We've got a situation here," Tom said, his voice low, serious. "The tunnel collapsed during rush hour. We're still digging out, but it's what we're finding that's the problem." I followed him, my heart sinking with each step. The rescue efforts were in full swing, but it was the looks on the faces of the rescuers that chilled me to the bone. Fear, mixed with a deep-seated horror, etched on each one. And then I saw them. The victims, or what was left of them. Partially dissolved, bones exposed, flesh stripped away as if some grotesque, invisible hand had clawed at them. I felt my stomach turn, my mind refusing to process what my eyes were seeing. Later, huddled in a cramped, dimly lit conference room deep within the city's morgue, Dr. Lean's words dripped like ice water down my spine. The substance we found on the victims, it's unlike anything I've seen. Acidic, yes, but it seems to adapt, breaking down tissue at a molecular level. And the weird part? It leaves the bones intact, as if it's not interested in them. I felt a shiver run down my spine. What could do this? Dr. Lean's expression was grim. Honestly, I have no idea. But I do know one thing. This wasn't an accident. This was a feeding frenzy. Back at the tunnel, armed with old blueprints and a growing sense of dread, I ventured deeper. The air inside seemed to thicken, the shadows twisting around me like living things. I began to hear whispers, faint screams that seemed to emanate from the walls themselves. The blueprints revealed a cavern system, partially unmapped, that the tunnel had been dug through. It can't be, I muttered to myself. But deep down, I knew. This was no natural disaster. This was something waking up, something ancient, buried in the rock. Each step forward felt like a betrayal, as if I was being led deeper into the belly of the beast. And then I saw it, a pulsing, amorphous mass, its edges indistinct, as if it was absorbing the light around it. The screams were louder now, the walls pulsating in rhythm. Suddenly, visions assaulted me. The city, consumed, buildings melting like wax, people running, their bodies dissolving into nothingness. I stumbled back, tripping over my own feet. I don't remember running, but I must have. The next thing I knew, I was back at the entrance, gasping for air. Tom grabbed me, holding me upright. "Ike, what did you see?" I tried to speak, but all that came out were incoherent mutterings. It was then that I saw it, on the news playing in the background. Reports of sinkholes opening up across the city, people vanishing. "It's moving," I finally managed to whisper. "It's coming for us all." As I write this, hidden away in a motel on the outskirts of the city, I realize the horrifying truth. The tunnel was just the beginning. It's not just a creature, it's a harbinger of a nightmare from beneath our feet. A reminder that we're not the deepest, darkest terror this world has to offer. And as for me, I'm just a man, armed with nothing but a pen, a phone with dwindling battery, and the overwhelming certainty that I'm running out of time. I've always been drawn to the darker corners of town, the ones that most people avoid. My friends call me a magnet for the macabre, a seeker of the sinister. They're not wrong. There's something about the unknown, the unexplained, that pulls me in like a moth to a flame. Which is why, on this chilly winter evening, I found myself standing in front of the infamous Ravenswood industrial plant, a monolith of neglect and terror, its history woven with tales of mysterious worker deaths. As I stepped out of the car, the crunch of gravel beneath my boots echoed through the stillness. Our group of urban explorers, all seasoned in the art of uncovering the hidden, exchanged eager glances. There was Jake, our de facto leader and thrill-seeker extraordinaire. Emily, with her camera at the ready to capture every nook and cranny. Matt, our tech guru equipped with gadgets to bypass any security system. And me, the group's self-appointed historian, drawn by the plant's dark past. My connection to Ravenswood ran deeper than mere curiosity. My grandfather, a man of few words, had spent his working life within those now silent walls. The stories he shared, sparse as they were, painted a picture of a place where time seemed to warp, where the ordinary became extraordinary. His sudden retirement, coupled with an unspoken fear that lingered in his eyes, only piqued my interest. "All right, crew, let's move. We don't have much daylight left," Jake called out, his voice low, a contrast to the excitement dancing in his eyes. As we approached the entrance, a sound, faint yet unmistakable, pierced the air, a distorted, mournful whistle, the kind that sends shivers down your spine. We halted, our heads swiveling towards the source of the sound. "What was that?" Emily whispered, her camera at the ready, as if expecting something to emerge from the shadows. "The factory whistle," I murmured, a shiver running down my spine. "Legend has it, it only sounds when something's about to go terribly wrong." Matt snorted. "Urban legend, guys. Probably just the wind." But I knew better. My grandfather used to speak of the whistle in hushed tones, how it would blow before each incident. With Matt working his magic on the security system, we slipped inside, our flashlights casting eerie shadows on the walls. The interior was a maze of mangled machinery, remnants of a time when Ravenswood was the heart of the town's industry. Bloodstains, long since turned to rust, told tales of accidents past, each one a grim reminder of the plant's deadly history. As we explored deeper, we stumbled upon an old control room, dusty files and reports scattered across a central table. I began to sift through them, my heart sinking with each page turn. Workers had indeed vanished, their disappearances attributed to the harsh conditions and outdated machinery. But the more I read, the more I became convinced that something more sinister was at play. "Guys, you need to see this," I called out, my voice barely above a whisper. They gathered around, their faces illuminated only by the pale light of our flashlights. The reports detailed malfunctions eerily similar to the equipment failures that had led to the accidents. But there was a pattern, a deliberate sequence to the malfunctions, suggesting that the accidents might not have been so accidental after all. Suddenly, Emily's camera flashed to life on its own, capturing a shot of the blood-stained wall behind us. The sound of the shutter click seemed to hang in the air, followed by an unsettling silence. "That's not possible," Matt muttered, fiddling with the camera. "It's fully charged, but it just died." And then Jake's flashlight flickered out, plunging us into darkness, the only sound the creaking of old metal and the distant, mournful sigh of the factory whistle, louder now, more insistent. Panic set in as we realized our equipment was malfunctioning in ways that mirrored the accidents in the reports. It was as if Ravenswood itself was replicating its past, determined to claim new victims. "We need to get out of here, now," I urged. But the doors, once easily bypassed, now refused to budge, as if sealed by an unseen hand. Night began to fall, casting Ravenswood in an even more sinister light. We huddled together, the whistle's intermittent wail our only companion. I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being herded, pushed towards some unknown fate, just like the workers before us. "My grandfather?" I started, my voice barely audible. "He always said the plant was hungry, that it took and took until it was fed enough to sleep again." The group turned to me, their faces etched with fear and a dawning realization. We were not explorers, but offerings, trapped in a cycle of horror that Ravenswood had perfected over the years. Hours ticked by, each one feeling like an eternity. The whistle would sound, and then silence. It was waiting, watching us, deciding. Trapped in Ravenswood, our breaths were shallow, our fear palpable. The factory whistle's mournful wail seemed to bore into my soul, a haunting melody that promised doom. We clung to each other, our flashlights mere flickers against the encroaching darkness. "There has to be a way out," Jake insisted, his voice trembling despite his bravado. He swung his light towards the control room door, but the beam barely cut through the oppressive gloom. "We just need to stay calm." Emily's camera, lifeless in her hands, suddenly emitted a distorted whirring sound. The lens extended and retracted, almost as if it were breathing. She dropped it with a gasp, and it shattered against the concrete floor. The noise echoed unnaturally, as if the plant itself were amplifying it. "What is this place?" Emily whispered, her voice on the edge of tears. "It's alive," I murmured. The realization struck me like a hammer. My grandfather always said the plant was hungry. He meant it literally. Ravenswood isn't just a building, it's a predator. Jake stared at me. "You're saying it's alive? Like alive? I don't know how," I admitted, but everything points to it. The accidents, the disappearances, the whistle. It's all connected, and it's been waiting. "For what?" Matt asked, his voice barely audible. "For us," I replied, the weight of the words settling over the group like a suffocating blanket. The factory whistle sounded again, louder this time, closer. The air seemed to grow heavier with each passing second. The walls groaned, metal shifting as if the plant itself was adjusting, preparing. A low vibration rippled beneath our feet. "We have to move," Jake said, tugging at Emily's arm. "Staying here isn't an option." Reluctantly, we followed him, navigating the labyrinth of decaying machinery and forgotten hallways. The plant seemed to guide us, blocking paths with collapsed beams and twisted metal, funneling us deeper into its heart. We stumbled into a cavernous chamber, dominated by a massive, rusted turbine. It loomed over us, its blades motionless, yet emanating an undeniable menace. Scattered around the room were remnants of workers, helmets, tools, even boots, as if they'd simply vanished mid-step. "This must be the central hub," Matt said, his voice shaking. "The reports mentioned equipment failures, starting here." Emily's flashlight illuminated a control panel, its buttons worn, but still intact. Among the grime, a single button glowed faintly red, pulsing like a heartbeat. "Should we press it?" Emily asked hesitantly. "Are you insane?" Jake snapped. "For all we know, it'll make things worse. Or it might stop this." I argued, "If the plant is alive, then there has to be a way to shut it down." Before anyone could object, I stepped forward and pressed the button. The response was immediate. The turbine roared to life, its blades spinning with a deafening screech. The ground trembled, and the walls seemed to close in, the very structure of Ravenswood rebelling against our intrusion. "What did you do?" Jake shouted, grabbing my arm. "I don't know," he yelled back, panic flooding my senses. The whistle blared, louder than ever, a piercing cacophony that brought us to our knees. The chamber filled with a blinding light, and shadows danced wildly on the walls, taking on shapes that seemed almost human. They moved with purpose, converging on us. "Run!" Jake screamed, but there was nowhere to go. The shadows surrounded us, their forms coalescing into a single, towering entity that loomed over the turbine. It spoke, not with words, but with a presence that invaded our minds. Images flashed before my eyes. Workers toiling endlessly, their lives consumed by the plant, their souls bound to its machinery. The entity fed on them, drawing strength from their fear, their pain. "It's the whistle," I realized, the thought piercing through the chaos. "It's not just a warning, it's a call, a summons." Emily clutched my arm, tears streaming down her face. "What do? We stopped feeding it." I said, though I had no idea how. Matt, suddenly resolute, pulled a small EMP device from his bag. "This might disrupt whatever's keeping it going," he said. "It's risky, but—" "Do it," Jake said, his voice firm despite the fear in his eyes. Matt activated the device, and a high-pitched whine filled the air. The light flickered, the turbines slowed, and the shadows recoiled, their forms dissolving into nothingness. The entity let out a guttural roar, a sound of rage and despair, before vanishing entirely. The whistle fell silent. The silence that followed was deafening. The plant seemed to exhale, its oppressive weight lifting. The doors creaked open, and a cold, fresh breeze swept in, carrying with it the scent of freedom. We stumbled out into the night, battered but alive. Ravenswood loomed behind us, its silhouette no longer menacing, but hollow, defeated. "What now?" Emily asked, her voice trembling. I glanced back at the plant, its dark windows like empty eyes. "We make sure no one else ever comes here," I said. "Let it stay forgotten." As we drove away, the first hints of dawn breaking over the horizon, I couldn't shake the feeling that Ravenswood wasn't truly gone. It had been silenced, yes, but something that old, that powerful, doesn't die so easily. The factory whistle may one day sound again. And that brings us to the end of these bone-chilling tales. From the cursed cliffs to the endless fog, the living tunnels, and the haunting whispers of the factory whistle, each story reminds us of one thing. Sometimes the most terrifying accidents aren't accidents at all. If you enjoyed this journey into the unsettling and unexplained, make sure to hit that like button and subscribe for more tales that will keep you awake at night. Share your thoughts or your own eerie experiences in the comments below. I'm Bon, your guide through the shadows, and I'll see you in the next story, if you dare to return.